You are. A man who truly loves you is not driven by impulse. He is governed by control. And control is not weakness. It is power contained. It is fire placed inside iron walls. You are. It is emotion that refuses to become chaos. If a man loves you deeply and still keeps his distance, it is not because he does not care. You are. It is because he understands the weight of his own intensity. And that single trait, self-mastery, separates a dangerous man from a dependable one. You are. You must understand something fundamental. Love, when mixed with insecurity, becomes obsession. Love, when mixed with immaturity, becomes control. Love, you are, when mixed with fear, becomes suffocation. But love, when mixed with discipline, becomes distance, intentional distance. He knows that desire can distort judgment. You are. He knows that attachment can weaken purpose. He knows that emotional hunger can destroy what it seeks to protect. So instead of collapsing into you, you are. Instead of flooding your world with constant attention, instead of demanding reassurance every hour, he steps back, not because he feels less, because he feels deeply. You are. A weak man moves closer when he feels afraid. A strong man steps back so he does not act from fear. That distance is not rejection. It is regulation. You are. You may interpret silence as indifference, but often silence is a man fighting his own chaos, so he does not hand it to you. You may interpret space as withdrawal. You are. But sometimes space is responsibility, the refusal to let emotion become burden. This is what most people misunderstand. Intensity is not proof of love. Consistency is. You are. Drama is not proof of passion. Stability is. Closeness is not proof of devotion. Control is. A man who lacks self-mastery will drown you in words. You are. He will promise endlessly. He will over-explain. He will cling. He will panic when you pull away. His love will feel loud but unstable. You are. But a man who has mastered himself understands something dangerous. If he allows himself to become consumed by you, he risks losing the structure of his own life. And a man without structure cannot protect, cannot lead, cannot build. So he creates space. He keeps working. He stays disciplined. He regulates his desire. You are. And that restraint is love expressed through responsibility. Now listen carefully. There is a difference between avoidance and restraint. You are. Avoidance is fear of connection. Restraint is respect for it. If he disappears without explanation, that is immaturity. If he manipulates distance to control you, you are. That is insecurity. But if he maintains space while remaining consistent, present, and respectful, that is strength. You are. Because he understands that love should enhance life, not replace it. The trait is self-mastery. Self-mastery means he does not text you every time he feels anxious. You are. Self-mastery means he does not demand constant validation. Self-mastery means he does not sacrifice his mission to soothe temporary emotion. You are. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Many people do not feel safe with disciplined love. They feel safer with chaotic love because chaos feels intense. You are. It feels dramatic. It feels like proof. But discipline is quiet. Discipline does not beg. Discipline does not chase recklessly. Discipline builds slowly. You are. A deeply loving man with self-mastery will not allow his emotions to control his behavior. He understands that attraction rises and falls. You are. He understands that moods shift. He understands that feelings fluctuate. But commitment is a decision, not a sensation. So when he keeps distance, you are. He is ensuring that what he offers you is chosen, not compulsive. He does not want to love you because he needs you. He wants to love you because he chooses you. You are. And that difference is everything. Neediness says, I cannot function without you. Strength says, I function fully, and I invite you into that strength. Distance, you are, when rooted in self-control, prevents resentment. It prevents dependency. It prevents emotional volatility. You are. It protects both people from turning love into a transaction of reassurance. And here is the final truth you must confront. If a man has no boundaries with himself, you are. He will have no boundaries in the relationship, and that leads to emotional instability. But if he has boundaries with himself, if he can regulate desire, you are. If he can hold emotion without collapsing into it, if he can delay gratification, then his love becomes powerful, not fragile. The one single trait is this: you are. He refuses to be ruled by impulse, and that refusal creates space, not coldness, not detachment, space. Because mature love is not about constant proximity. You are. It is about controlled presence. So do not confuse distance with absence. Sometimes the man who steps back is the man ensuring he shows up correctly. You are. And if you cannot understand disciplined love, you will mistake strength for disinterest. But if you learn to recognize self-mastery, you will see that distance, you are, when paired with consistency and respect, is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of power contained, and power contained is the safest form of love there is. You are. Love without strength becomes possession, and possession is not love. It is fear dressed as devotion. Understand this clearly, you are. When a person claims to love you but lacks strength, what they are really expressing is insecurity. And insecurity does not protect, it controls. It does not build, you are, it clings. It does not trust, it monitors. Real love requires restraint because real love demands power under control. Without strength, you are. Affection turns into surveillance. Without discipline, attachment turns into ownership. Without self-command, desire becomes domination. Weak love says, you are. You are mine. Strong love says, I choose you. That difference is not poetic, it is structural. It defines whether a relationship becomes a prison or a partnership. You are. When someone lacks inner stability, they lean on you to regulate their emotions. They require constant reassurance. They panic when you need space. You are. They interpret independence as betrayal. And slowly, subtly, love becomes a contract of emotional dependency. You stop acting freely. You are. You start managing their insecurity. You shrink your world to keep them comfortable. That is not intimacy. That is containment. You are. Possession grows where strength is absent. A man or woman without strength cannot tolerate uncertainty. You are. They cannot handle the natural tension that exists between two autonomous people. They need control to feel safe. They need access to your time, your thoughts, you are, your movements. They want to reduce unpredictability by tightening their grip. And the tighter they grip, the faster love suffocates, you are. Because love cannot breathe where freedom does not exist. Strength is what allows someone to love without owning. It is what allows them to say, I care deeply, you are, but I do not control. Strength tolerates space. Strength tolerates mystery. Strength tolerates the reality that another human being is separate, sovereign, you are, and capable of leaving. That is terrifying to the weak, but it is respected by the strong. Real love requires restraint because passion left unchecked becomes destructive. Intensity feels romantic at first. Jealousy feels like proof. Constant attention feels flattering. But over time, you are. Intensity without control erodes respect. Jealousy poisons trust. Constant attention becomes surveillance. What begins as devotion ends as dependency. You are. Restraint is not coldness. Restraint is responsibility. When you are strong, you do not react impulsively. You do not accuse without evidence. You are. You do not demand access to every private thought. You do not explode when insecure. You regulate yourself before you respond. That self-regulation protects the relationship from your worst instincts. And every human being has worst instincts. You have the capacity for jealousy. You are. You have the capacity for control. You have the capacity for manipulation when afraid. Strength is what keeps those impulses in check. You are. Strength is the decision to pause instead of accuse, to breathe instead of attack, to trust instead of interrogate. Without strength, you are. Love becomes possession because fear takes over. Fear of abandonment, fear of inadequacy, fear of loss. And fear, when it governs behavior, produces control. You are. The controlling partner often says, I just care too much. No, they care without strength. They feel without discipline. They attach without stability. You are. And so their love becomes heavy. Heavy love feels intense but unsafe. Strong love feels steady but powerful. When you possess someone, you reduce them. You are. You attempt to shrink their autonomy to soothe your insecurity. You want them predictable. You want them accessible at all times. You want reassurance on demand. You are. But love cannot be forced into compliance. It either grows freely or decays under pressure. Restraint is what preserves attraction. It preserves respect. You are. It preserves individuality. When you are capable of holding your emotions without acting on every surge of insecurity, you demonstrate maturity. You are. You show that your love is chosen, not compulsive. That is rare. Most people mistake emotional overflow for authenticity. They believe that if they feel it, you are. They must express it immediately. But maturity understands timing. Maturity understands proportion. Maturity understands that not every insecurity deserves a reaction. You are. Restraint does not mean silence. It means measured expression. You communicate concerns without accusation. You ask questions without interrogation. You are. You express needs without ultimatums. That requires strength because it requires vulnerability without aggression. Possession attempts to eliminate risk. You are. Real love accepts risk. You cannot love someone deeply without accepting that they are free to think independently, free to have boundaries. You are. Free to walk away if respect disappears. That freedom is what makes love meaningful. If someone is with you because they are controlled, that is compliance. You are, not devotion. Strength allows you to say, I value you, but I will not cage you. And paradoxically, that is what makes someone want to stay. You are. Because everyone craves safety, and safety is not created by control. It is created by stability. A strong person does not need to dominate to feel secure. You are. They do not need constant validation to feel worthy. They build their identity outside the relationship. They maintain purpose. They maintain discipline. You are. They maintain self-respect. And because they are stable within themselves, they do not attempt to own another person. They invite. They do not impress. You are. If you want real love, cultivate strength. Develop emotional regulation. Build confidence independent of romantic attachment. You are. Learn to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing. Learn to feel jealousy without weaponizing it. Learn to desire without demanding. You are. Because love without strength becomes possession, and possession destroys the very thing it tries to keep. But love with strength, love governed by restraint, you are. Discipline and self-mastery become something rare. It becomes powerful. It becomes steady. It becomes unshakable. You are. And that is the kind of love that does not suffocate. It elevates. Emotional control is a higher form of power than emotional expression because anyone can explode. You are, but very few can carefully. Expression is easy. Reaction is automatic. Anger shouts. Jealousy accuses. Insecurity demands reassurance. Hurt withdraws. You are. These responses require no discipline. They are impulses. And impulses are not strength. They are reflex. Power begins where impulse ends. We live in a culture that glorifies expression. Say exactly what you feel. Never hold back. If you're angry, you are. Show it. But what most people call authenticity is often just a lack of regulation. They confuse emotional leakage with honesty. They confuse intensity with depth. You are. They confuse reaction with courage. But true power is not loud. True power is measured. Anyone can express emotion. It takes strength to master it. You are. When you lack emotional control, you become predictable. People can manipulate you because they can trigger you. If criticism instantly makes you defensive, you are. You are controlled. If silence instantly makes you anxious, you are controlled. If disagreement instantly makes you aggressive, you are controlled. You are. And whoever can control your reactions controls you. That is not power. Power is the ability to feel everything and still choose your response. You are. Emotional control does not mean suppression. It does not mean denial. It does not mean becoming cold or detached. It means you experience the emotion fully. You are, but you refuse to let it dictate your behavior. You place reason above reaction. You insert a pause between stimulus and response. And in that pause, you are. You decide who you are going to be. That pause is strength. When someone insults you and you do not erupt, that is not weakness. That is command. You are. When someone tries to provoke you and you remain steady, that is not passivity. That is dominance over yourself. And self-dominance is the highest hierarchy of power. You are. Consider anger. Anger feels powerful. It surges through the body. It sharpens the voice. It demands attention. But uncontrolled anger destroys credibility. You are. It reveals instability. It hands your emotional state to the environment. You become reactive rather than strategic. The controlled individual, however, you are, uses anger as information. They ask, why did this affect me? What boundary feels crossed? What response will protect my dignity rather than damage it? You are. They do not deny anger. They refine it. That refinement is power. Emotional expression without control is like raw electricity, dangerous and chaotic. You are. Emotional control is electricity channeled through structure, useful, directed, constructive. The same applies to fear. Fear expressed impulsively leads to panic. You are. Panic leads to poor decisions. Poor decisions compound the very outcome you feared. But fear acknowledged calmly becomes awareness. It sharpens preparation. You are. It strengthens planning. It encourages discipline. Control transforms emotion from liability into leverage. Many people believe that emotional intensity proves passion. You are, but intensity without regulation is volatility, and volatility is unstable. In relationships, uncontrolled emotion creates cycles, dramatic highs and catastrophic lows. You are. One day affection, the next day withdrawal. One moment admiration, the next accusation. That instability erodes trust. Trust is built on consistency. You are. And consistency requires control. If your partner cannot predict your emotional stability, they cannot feel safe. You are. If your colleagues cannot trust your composure under pressure, they will not rely on you. If your children cannot depend on your calm during conflict, you are. They will mirror your chaos. Emotional control is leadership. It signals reliability. It signals maturity. It signals internal strength. You are. The individual who controls their emotions does not avoid confrontation. They approach it strategically. They do not scream to be heard. They speak with precision. You are. They do not collapse under stress. They regulate their breathing, their tone, their posture. You are. They understand that how they deliver a message often matters more than the message itself. You must understand this: emotions are data, not directives. You are. They inform you, but they do not command you. If you treat every feeling as an order, you will live a chaotic life. You will change direction with every mood. You are. You will damage relationships with every surge of insecurity. You will sacrifice long-term goals for short-term relief. You are. Powerful individuals endure discomfort without immediate discharge. They can sit with anxiety without texting impulsively. You are. They can sit with anger without sending destructive messages. They can sit with sadness without withdrawing completely. That endurance builds resilience. You are. And resilience builds authority. Emotional expression feels relieving in the moment, but emotional control builds respect over time. People trust those who are steady. You are. They gravitate toward those who remain grounded during crisis. They admire those who do not fracture under pressure. You are. This does not mean you become silent or emotionally unavailable. It means you choose timing, you choose proportion. You are. You do not magnify minor issues into major conflicts. You do not allow temporary emotions to dictate permanent decisions. You are. The strongest person in the room is rarely the loudest. It is the one who listens fully, speaks deliberately, and reacts minimally. You are. Because they are not enslaved by their internal storms. Imagine two individuals facing criticism. One lashes out defensively, raises their voice, attacks back. You are. The other pauses, listens, evaluates whether the criticism contains truth, and responds calmly. Which one appears powerful? Which one earns long-term respect? You are. Control is not glamorous. It is disciplined. It requires self-awareness. It requires humility. You are. It requires the willingness to admit when emotion is distorting perception. It requires practice, repeated moments of choosing restraint over reaction. You are. But that discipline compounds. Over time, you become unshakeable. You are not easily provoked, not easily manipulated, not easily destabilized. You are. Your emotions become allies instead of masters. And that is why emotional control is a higher form of power than emotional expression. You are. Because expression proves you feel. Control proves you lead. When you master your emotions, you master your behavior. When you master your behavior, you are. You shape your outcomes. And when your outcomes are guided by deliberate action rather than reactive impulse, your life becomes intentional rather than accidental. You are. Anyone can react. Few can regulate. And the ones who regulate quietly, consistently, deliberately are the ones who hold real power. Distance can be discipline. You are. Not rejection. And if you misunderstand that, you will sabotage something that was never meant to harm you. Most people interpret distance emotionally. You are. They assume withdrawal means loss of interest. They assume silence means indifference. They assume space means replacement. But that assumption reveals insecurity. You are. Not truth. Because sometimes distance is not about leaving. It is about maintaining control. There is a fundamental difference between abandonment and discipline. You are. Abandonment is careless. Discipline is intentional. Abandonment avoids responsibility. Discipline protects it. When someone steps back, you must ask, is this avoidance? You are. Or is this regulation? Strong individuals understand that constant proximity can distort clarity. When emotions run high, when attraction intensifies, you are. When attachment deepens rapidly, judgment weakens. Decisions become impulsive. Words become exaggerated. Promises become inflated. In that state, you are. People confuse intensity with compatibility. Distance restores perspective. Distance allows emotion to settle so that truth can surface. Without discipline, you are. Relationships accelerate too quickly. Two people merge identities before they understand each other's values. They speak about forever before they've tested loyalty. You are. They prioritize connection over character. And when reality interrupts fantasy, the collapse is dramatic. Disciplined distance prevents that collapse. You are. It slows the pace. It protects individual identity. It ensures that connection grows through choice, not compulsion. Now, understand this clearly. You are. Rejection removes access. Discipline regulates it. Rejection communicates, I do not want you. Discipline communicates, I want this to develop correctly. You are. A person who practices disciplined distance does not disappear randomly. They do not manipulate through silence. They do not withhold affection to provoke anxiety. You are. Instead, they maintain structure. They continue their responsibilities. They protect their routine. They refuse to let emotional excitement override life balance. You are. That restraint can feel uncomfortable, especially to someone who equates closeness with constant validation. But validation is not stability. You are. Constant communication is not security. Endless attention is not depth. Sometimes distance is the evidence of seriousness, because seriousness requires thoughtfulness. You are. It requires evaluation. It requires patience. If someone rushes toward you without boundaries, they will likely rush away with the same intensity. You are. Undisciplined closeness burns fast. Disciplined connection builds slowly. Distance also tests emotional maturity. You are. Can you tolerate space without creating catastrophic stories in your mind? Can you maintain confidence without constant reassurance? You are. Can you trust consistency over intensity? Weak attachment demands immediate feedback. Strong attachment respects rep. You are. There are moments when stepping back prevents damage. During conflict, example, emotional flooding reduces rational thinking. You are. Words said in heat often scar permanently. Taking space in those moments is not rejection, it is protection. It prevents escalation. It allows reflection. You are. It creates the opportunity for constructive dialogue instead of destructive reaction. Without distance, conflict becomes chaos. With disciplined space, you are. Conflict becomes growth. Distance also preserves individuality. When two people become inseparable too quickly, they risk emotional dependency. Identity becomes fused. You are. Decisions become influenced by fear of loss rather than personal conviction. Over time, resentment forms because autonomy was sacrificed. You are. Disciplined individuals refuse to lose themselves inside connection. They maintain friendships, they pursue goals, they honor responsibilities. You are. They understand that attraction thrives when two whole people meet, not when two incomplete identities cling. And here is the uncomfortable truth. You are. People who fear distance often fear independence, because independence exposes insecurity. If you panic every time someone takes space, examine why. You are. Is it because of their behavior or because of your fear of being alone? Discipline feels threatening to those who equate constant access with control. You are. But healthy distance does something powerful. It builds anticipation. It builds respect. It builds trust in consistency rather than frequency. You are. When someone shows up reliably, even if not constantly, that reliability matters more than intensity. You are. When someone communicates clearly that they need time to think rather than reacting impulsively, that is maturity. You are. When someone maintains emotional steadiness rather than overwhelming you with extremes, that is strength. You are. Distance becomes dangerous only when it is paired with inconsistency. If someone withdraws unpredictably, avoids communication, and creates confusion, you are. That is not discipline, that is instability. But when distance is structured, communicated, and consistent, it signals control. Control over emotion. You are. Control over impulse. Control over pace. Strong individuals understand that sustainable connection requires breathing room. Just as muscles grow during recovery, our relationships deepen during space. Reflection clarifies intention. Time reveals character. Absence exposes whether connection is real or merely convenient. You are. Distance removes illusion. If connection disappears the moment space appears, it was never strong. If connection remains steady despite physical or emotional distance, you are. It is rooted in something deeper than proximity. That is power. Do not confuse someone's need for discipline with a lack of desire. You are. Sometimes the person who steps back is ensuring that they do not act from temporary emotion. They are choosing deliberate progression over impulsive attachment. You are. And that choice protects both people, because love built without discipline becomes fragile. Love built with structure becomes resilient. If you want something lasting, you are. You must tolerate moments of space. You must resist the urge to chase reassurance. You must allow rhythm instead of demanding constant closeness. You are. Distance can sharpen value. It can reveal intention. It can strengthen emotional muscles that would otherwise weaken through dependency. So the next time space appears, you are. Do not immediately label it rejection. Observe the pattern. Observe the consistency. Observe the respect. If those remain intact, distance is not your enemy. You are. It is discipline. And discipline in relationships as in life is what transforms temporary emotion into lasting strength. You are. The one trait that creates distance is self-mastery, and most people misinterpret it because they are unfamiliar with strength that is quiet. You are. Understand this immediately. When a person governs themselves, they do not move impulsively toward every desire. They do not collapse into every feeling. You are. They do not surrender their structure for temporary emotional gratification. And to someone who equates closeness with constant availability, you are. That discipline feels like distance, but it is not rejection. It is regulation. Self-mastery is the ability to feel deeply without acting recklessly. You are. It is the capacity to experience attraction without losing direction. It is the strength to care without becoming consumed. And that strength naturally creates space. You are. Because a self-governed person refuses to be driven by impulse. Most individuals move toward what feels good in the moment. They text when anxious. You are. They demand reassurance when insecure. They chase when uncertain. They overpromise when emotionally overwhelmed. Their behavior fluctuates with their mood. You are. That volatility creates intensity, but it does not create stability. Self-mastery eliminates volatility. And when volatility disappears, so does desperation. You are. That absence of desperation can feel unfamiliar. You might wonder, why aren't they reacting more? Why aren't they chasing harder? You are. Why aren't they overwhelmed? The answer is simple. They are in control of themselves. A person without self-mastery seeks constant emotional stimulation. You are. They need frequent validation. They measure connection by frequency of contact. They panic at silence. They interpret pause as loss. And so they move frantically. You are. Trying to secure certainty. But a person with self-mastery understands that certainty does not come from control. It comes from character. You are. They maintain their responsibilities. They maintain their discipline. They maintain their identity outside the relationship. And because of that, you are. They do not orbit around another person's attention. This creates distance, but it is structured distance. You are. Self-mastery means they will not sacrifice long-term goals for short-term pleasure. If they have work to complete, they complete it. If they need time to think, you are, they take it. If emotions are running high, they pause rather than escalate. They refuse to allow feelings to override judgment. That pause is often misread. You are. In a world addicted to immediacy, delay feels like disinterest, but delay can be deliberation. It can be maturity. You are. It can be the refusal to speak words that are not fully considered. Self-mastery also means boundaries. You are. A self-governed person does not tolerate disrespect simply because they feel attached. They do not beg for attention. You are. They do not negotiate their values to maintain proximity. If something feels misaligned, they step back rather than cling tighter. That step back creates space. You are. Not because they care less, but because they respect themselves more. And here is the difficult truth. You are. Many people are more comfortable with neediness than with self-possession. Neediness feels flattering. It signals dependency. It signals emotional reliance. But self-possession signals independence. It says, I value, but I am whole without you. You are. That statement can trigger insecurity in someone who equates love with dependency. Self-mastery refuses emotional chaos. When conflict arises, you are. The self-mastered individual does not explode. They analyze, they regulate, they choose tone carefully. They do not weaponize vulnerability. You are. They do not escalate unnecessarily. And if resolution is not possible in the moment, they withdraw temporarily to regain clarity. You are. That withdrawal can feel cold to someone who relies on dramatic expression as proof of care. But consider the alternative. Uncontrolled emotion leads to damaging words. You are. Impulsive decisions and avoidable regret. Self-mastery prevents destruction before it begins. It creates distance from chaos. It creates distance from manipulation. You are. It creates distance from emotional instability. And sometimes it creates distance from people who cannot tolerate discipline. You are. A self-mastered individual will not chase someone who consistently disrespects them. They will not argue endlessly to convince someone of their worth. You are. They will not remain where boundaries are ignored. They step away quietly. That quiet exit is not weakness. It is authority. Authority over self. You are. Authority over impulse. Authority over fear. The absence of self-mastery produces closeness that feels urgent but fragile. You are. The presence of self-mastery produces connection that feels measured but strong. It may develop more slowly. It may appear less dramatic, but it is durable. You are. Because it is chosen repeatedly, not clung to desperately. Self-mastery also protects identity. When you know who you are, you do not lose yourself in attraction. You are. You do not abandon your standards to avoid loneliness. You do not silence your convictions to maintain harmony. You remain grounded. You are. And grounded individuals do not lean excessively. That stance naturally creates a slight distance, the distance of stability. You are. You cannot merge completely with someone who refuses to dissolve themselves, and you should not want to, because two strong individuals do not collapse into each other. You are. They meet from a place of structure. They connect without surrendering autonomy. They care without losing clarity. You are. The one trait that creates distance is self-mastery, because self-mastery filters behavior. It removes impulsivity. It removes desperation. You are. It removes emotional volatility. What remains is deliberate action. Deliberate action is calm. Calm is steady. Steady is powerful. You are. If someone steps back to think rather than react, that is self-mastery. If someone maintains focus on purpose by emotional pull, that is self-mastery. You are. If someone refuses to participate in chaos even when provoked, that is self-mastery. And that discipline may look like distance to those accustomed to disorder. You are. But understand this, the person who masters themselves is the person capable of lasting commitment, because commitment requires consistency. You are, and consistency requires control. Without self-mastery, love becomes reactive. With self-mastery, love becomes intentional. You are, and intentional love does not rush recklessly forward. It advances carefully. It chooses consciously. It stands firm. You are. The distance created by self-mastery is not a wall, it is a boundary. And boundaries are not barriers to connection. You are. They are the structure that allows connection to endure.